The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Wrestling is Real podcast, because wrestling needs us.
Allow me to be the first to announce that we are officially in the off season of Wrestlemania. So whatever you were all concerned about and you were all up and excited about, whatever hype you got from Wrestlemania this year, the bloom is off the rose. It's done. No more. That's it. If you were hoping more, it's not happening. And that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is right now in the world of professional wrestling when it comes to WWE, because this is what they do. It's a constant factor every year. And for all of you that listen to this program, you know to come to me during the off season. I know that some of you go to the other podcasters. We're all in a happy mode and everything's very positive and we're cautiously optimistic. It's like that every year. But then we get to this, and what happens is what happens every freaking year. We don't like that it happens like this, but it does. And there's no way to get around the fact that we have this constant problem with the creative, where things were bad for September, October, November, December. I mean, again, throughout the pandemic. Let's just be honest. That moment after SummerSlam, I mean, there were a couple of things that were interesting in between with Backlash or with Money in the Bank and with SummerSlam last year. But then things just didn't get as creative. The cinematic portion has gone away. And now we're at the point, once again, where we go back to the offseason, where some of the bad habits that this company normally does continue to happen, and then the continued decline goes further and progresses. So the kind of outbursts that Wrestling Twitter had this week after Monday Night Raw, no surprise at all. It wasn't that long ago we had the same thing. And then what happens? Well, Twitter then gets all crapped over on Raw. They complain about the same things over and over. I'm with you. I'm not saying that you're wrong at all. I know that you're right, and I agree with you. But it's the same problem all the time, and nothing's getting done about it. It's the continued decline. This company, there's so many things they're doing right, but then when we get to this point here, it's the same issue over and over. It's like, well, what are you going to do now to fix the issue? What are we going to do now to get things back to where we needed to be when it comes to how this company needs to run, to get a return on investment for the people that are putting in billions of dollars in contracts right now to this company? This is important for every other wrestling company out there. WWE, it's crucial for them to get this right. They're running on all cylinders right now. Their business model is on fire. There are so many different pipelines of revenue coming into this company. They're in great shape for that. But they still need to not be able to just do content for the sake of content. There has to be something more to what they're doing. We're well aware of that. So to hear the unmistaken outbursts, the outcries, the outrage that has come across the wrestling Twitter public and the internet wrestling community in general, it's no surprise. But some people are just going to go ahead and continue to cry over spilled milk because it continues to get spilled. And this company doesn't know how to spill and doesn't even know how to pour the milk into the jar anymore or into the cup. They're just having issues. And it's because there's a real friction at the nucleus of the creative. Vince McMahon in particular. Once you are able to go ahead and rectify that situation, somehow extract him out of this whole situation, it doesn't mean the old man needs to go away altogether. No, we want him around. We absolutely respect what he has done for us. Look at TikTokers I watch all the time. How many times do I need to see Rock and Shawn Michaels or DX and New Age Outlaws and all the Attitude Era reconstituted and brought back up? How many more biographies do we need to see on Roddy Piper or Macho Man Randy Savage or Stone Cold Steve Austin? I get it. We live for this. And we do. But when things are going bad right now, somebody needs to go ahead and realize we need another adjustment, an attitude adjustment, just like back then. It's time to shake things up again. These are the cliches we hear all the time, but we just can't say the cliches anymore. There has to be some action behind this. And there are some changes being made. There are some things being done, but the ultimate crux of all this, the Wizard of Oz, Vince McMahon, and the people that he has to trust around him are not doing him any favors. And I feel like there's a crisis and anxiety on Vince McMahon's part to keep his spot. It feels like that's where he's at right now. He's like the champion here. He needs to keep his spot. He needs to keep his baby going. And that's got to be tough on someone that's, in his mid-70s, struggling to go ahead and say, I got to let this go. I have to keep my hands, I have to somehow let my hands off of this. Everybody's telling me I need to delegate, and I can't, because that's not Vince McMahon. So what do? You have to wait for him to decide to go away. Or someone has the wherewithal to say, Vince, you have to go ahead and step back. You can't just run day to day. You have to trust this amazing company that you built. You have all these resources, all this money. You have the means and the resources to get the right people here. You could pick any television writer, showrunner from anywhere, and you could rotate them, and you could pay them to do good content on a regular basis, do arcs. I mean, seriously, you could do showrunners that could go ahead and split up the 52-week year and split it up into 13 weeks. And really, what an idea. Would this be too far of a stretch, listeners, my listeners, who I'm grateful for listening? If we took this on a TV sense and somebody handled Royal Rumble to WrestleMania, and that was the showrunner specifically between those two shows, and so the showrunners are very intricate in building stories that must coincide with what will be the ultimate WrestleMania storylines in April. And if you split up the creative team where they did work, if the showrunners worked in arcs, they worked in 13 weeks. They know they have 3 pay-per-views to handle. They have 1 big show to handle. And they work their way with the ultimate goal of working internal story arcs around a major story arc. I wouldn't be surprised if Nick Khan isn't thinking about that right now. How can we do that? That would be a very efficient way of doing things. Because then you'd have somebody, you have to have about 3 or 4 people that could showrun, that could absolutely handle the creative team, get the whole story in the right direction, oversee and observe, and manage all the expectations. It can be done. And having them do 13 weeks a year, that's not out of the normal scatter. It's not a bad thing to do. And then you have them continuously make sure they follow the storylines, follow the progression, what's going on, follow the continuity. And then you come in, that person comes in for 13 weeks, show runs, does what they need to do, gets these certain stars over, and does what they need to do to get the development of these stars and characters over and make it happen. That's not hard. But that's not what this company's built on. This is wrestling. They call it sports entertainment because that's just a better way to go and call it, but it's still wrestling. It's being booked as a wrestling show. Meanwhile, the perception that's always been since '83 was sports entertainment. So at what point do you say to yourself, well, we have to book this as a story? I mean, it's still wrestling and we have the matches, but all these matches mean nothing if we're just building a storyline to a match where Drew McIntyre fights 3 times in the same night for no reason whatsoever. You might get some newsworthy things coming out of Raw and SmackDown, absolutely. SmackDown's being booked better than Raw. But then Raw, the means to an end. There are ends that have means, but they're not justified. They don't handle it right. Raw can be done in a different way. There's the effort being put there is secondary. We know that. The star power is not secondary. I'd like to think that some of the players on the Raw roster could do very well on SmackDown and perform very well for Fox. We know that. And it's not as if this company can't do certain things with certain creative members and make some stars out of what they're doing. I see what NXT's doing. It's not bad. For them to get 750,000, 800,000 viewers, it's not bad. Why? And they're doing a pretty good job of booking a show. Now, they still need to go ahead and they need to go ahead and widen the spectrum and not narrowcast all their stars to be the same thing or something similar. Kind of cookie cutter is what I feel like in NXT. There are some stars that feel like they're the same with others, with a little bit of a difference, but not much. And that's what needs to happen over there, is NXT needs to have a wider spectrum. That's what all these brands under WWE in general. But no one is able to get and penetrate through the wall that is Vince McMahon and the control that he still has. Nick Khan and the team that's around him, the president right now at WWE World Wrestling Entertainment, Nick Khan has to realize this. When he sees stories, now they're not making it into the mainstream media because no one in the wrestling even cares about the fact that Vince rips up scripts for Raw and rewrites them in the last minute. But that is the biggest problem right now. For that to continue to happen, it's too much. And there's a story from the Sports Show I want to bring up that talks about this. Because this is the indicator that talks about everything else that's going on with this company that we complain about. Now, we only hear about the certain times where we hear storylines being changed last minute, or hearing that the format was ripped up for the night and started anew, and it's changing on the fly. But we don't know what gets changed once Vince shows up, or whoever else is doing something and they come here. We don't know that yet. But you need to go ahead and keep an eye out on the fact that we're here and this constant problem happens. But we know there's other things that are going on here that constantly happen with this product. And Vince continues to go ahead and tinker and tinker and tinker. So you just can't have a set plan and then make minor adjustments. No, they are overhauls instead of adjustments. There's no way to run a business like that. You're building a building, and you got a construction job, and you start making massive changes to the blueprint. Well, yeah, it's going to screw up, and it's going to be a train wreck, and it's going to blow up in your face. With all the things being planned, the company, since they got the new broadcast deals, they're not as cheap as they have been. They've been spending money. They put a lot of money into the Thunderdome. They are taking some props, and they are spending a little bit on certain props with what they're doing. They're still being very efficient, though. But they are doing things where you could tell they're putting some more effort into what they're doing. Especially after they made so much money in WrestleMania. They're doing okay with money. They're not hurting right now. They could put some money towards what they're doing. They haven't had a problem paying their stars. But then again, they also pay some of the stars too much money for not doing anything. And it's not on the stars. It's not on those wrestlers. But if they're not going to use them, let them go somewhere else. Some of the intentions behind the reasons they do the things they do. The fact that we probably have a lot of wrestlers right now in NXT, an overhaul, or there's quite a few on the main roster that might be just in catering all the time, for the simple fact that they do not want, that the company does not want AEW or someone else to go and pick them up. The complex that Vince McMahon must have for certain stars, that he has to go ahead and pay these people so they don't work somewhere else. Pay them to not work. It's like a mafia thing. Just be in catering, enjoy yourself, enjoy your paycheck, and don't work. And remember, some people have left because they wanted to work. All these wrestlers want to work. I don't think they go ahead and work all this time, bust their ass somewhere, and then they come into the company and they say, we'll get $500,000. We're not going to do anything half the time. I'll say this, for the Good Brothers, there might have been a time they didn't work so much and they weren't really doing much with them. And okay, but you're still paying us all this money. Right now, whatever they're getting paid with AEW or Impact or wherever else, they're working. They're working all the time. We can see that. But now back to the original story. This is to start from everything. Again, you want to fix the problem, you got to go all the way into Vince McMahon. He has to be removed from day to day. Not completely removed. He has to go to oversight. He has to delegate. And then a different system has to come into place for the creative team, for the people that are managing the wrestling part. If you want Bruce Pritchard or Paul Heyman or Jeff Jarrett or whoever else you got, you want them to be consultants, then let them be consultants. And let them get certain ideas greenlit or not. But they don't get to go ahead and greenlight or red light things. Bruce Pritchard should not have the option to do that. Should not have the freedom to do that. Consulting. That's it. And then let these writers and let these creative people do their jobs. For better or for worse. It's not as if we had an idea that goes bad, you can't just go ahead and turn around. You've made so many investments on so much talent in the first place that you have failed on. The creative team, if given the opportunity to actually do their jobs without restraints, can't have much worse of a track record than you do. Vince, Bruce, whoever else that needs to hear this. Jim Parsons, over the Sports Center, he wrote this story, WWE making numerous last-minute creative changes to big storylines. Very interesting, talks about this. Of course, he wrote this after Raw. And this is mostly Raw we're talking about, not SmackDown. And by the way, some of these matches that are advertised, now they're not advertised weeks ahead, but they do get announced sometimes, maybe the night before or the day of, and then they get switched. So they always have to advertise something to put on because they have to give promos to USA Network to promote ahead of time or to promote across the NBC Universal Network so they can go ahead and promote Raw to get people over in a cross-promotional effort. For fans who might have tuned in to see Randy Orton take on Braun Strowman, instead, he got thrown into an unexpected program with Riddle. It's a touch confusing. Now, he writes here, Jim, there was a time where WWE planned out their storylines months in advance. Well, that's been a long time. Some storylines might be months in advance, but we don't know how much that really is true today. With so much weekly original programming required, that's not terribly realistic in today's landscape, but the amount of changes the company's making of late is beyond the norm. According to Fightful Select, through WrestlingNews.co, various storylines that have been changed over the past few weeks. And Vince McMahon has arrived to TV events, changing the scripts just hours before it goes live. This is unacceptable. Nick Khan, you can't let this keep going on. This cannot continue. You might just be aware of this now. You've only been given so much power, and you have earned so much to be rewarded more control and more influence. But you need to go and oversee what's going on here. Read the writing on the wall. Follow the wrestling media for the fact that they are selling the truth, that the changes are being made, that your TV show that's running 3 hours on cable television to an audience of at least 2 million viewers, it could be more, which used to be up to around 10, not on both shows, but about 8 million viewers for Raw at the highest end in its peak. So we get Riddle stuck with Randy Orton, who was in favor of working, and then Orton moved out of his feud with Strowman, because then Strowman was put into working alongside Drew McIntyre against Mason T-Bar, the former members of Retribution, whose names have not been changed yet, to continue to suck, where they unmasked them in the process. This is from last week. Title changes and futures speak to the futures of talents like the former members of Retribution, The WWE seems fine to just waltz in and make significant changes prior to the show airing and potentially making decisions that have a huge reach in terms of bigger programs on their flagship shows. It's baffling the company seems so lackadaisical, even with their past reputation for throwing things against the wall to see what sticks. So I get where he's coming from. But really the issue is on Raw for the most part. Whatever kind of momentum that WrestleMania gave to SmackDown has continued, because that audience has stayed pretty steady. Not a lot of drop-off. So that's okay. Now, I can go ahead and bring up a number of stories, which I'm going to do right now, of people that have commented on the current state of the company's creative, which is mostly on Raw. Let's be clear. There are 3 hours on Monday nights that we're all concerned about. That's a lot of airtime. SmackDown, it's not so much. I mean, SmackDown's much more tolerable, but it's actually pretty much better. It's not perfect, but it's much better. And that's based on the level of importance that this show has. This is still a relatively new broadcaster in Fox. While USA has been with them, back on board with them, by the way. But then you got to think about NBC Universal. They're given the inferior program on Monday nights, and they get the Peacock deal. There's a whole lot of money. There's a whole lot of money invested right now in this company. So they're making money off of Peacock because of what's being done, but that's the legacy content. You got to be able to go ahead and continue to put in new quality content, not just new content, which WWE Network has new content, but the in-ring stuff has to have new content as well. I mean, wouldn't it be easier to go ahead and have new content that's already been done, produced on the fly, and then this company continues to have to go into post-production to make something good out of something that was badly done when first done? But this company's not going to go ahead and just pre-produce everything. They're just not willing to do that. We notice. With NXT, you at least see there are certain things being pre-produced, which is good. SmackDown, also seeing things pre-produced. Why the Raw side doesn't get that at all? They just have to run through the 3 hours as is. It doesn't make any sense. If this show actually had to go and deal with another competitor, I don't know how it would do. When you think about it, when Raw had to counter program against WCW, there was a lot of pieces that had to be put into place to make that show compelling and interesting and different. There was not a lot of dull moments on Raw when they had competition. For the short time they had TNA up against them for 4 months. For the 5 years that WCW was around, they counter-programmed. There wasn't a whole lot of dull moments. There was a lot of moments that would stand out, even though the show might have been a little bit long. And they also only had 2 hours to do instead of the 3. We all know this. I am not repeating anything new here, anything newly creative. But I'm making the context of where I'm coming from. So let's talk about a few things that are going on. I want to take from a couple of different points of view. One of the first people I'm going to talk about that's going to have his comments about WWE is Hugo Savinovich, who, as we know, was a longtime Spanish announcer. He was on a recent episode of the Wrestling Inc. Daily to discuss the current state. He pointed out that the company's been more profitable during the pandemic since the company no longer tours for live events. And Savinovich says, WWE dominates wrestling because they're number one company in the world. However, if you closely study the product, you're going to realize that they're actually making more money now with the Thunderdome because they were not drawing on the road. It was embarrassing. They were not drawing for Raw or SmackDown. They were actually losing money. Now they have one building where they do 2 shows and NXT in a smaller building, and all their shows are making money. So Savinovich also added, the reality is the number one company in the world that has almost 300 top talents, and the people who work there are actually upset. Not many people want to talk about it because they're scared of the monster. And then he also going on to say that the only true enemy that WWE has is WWE. Because they don't need more money. They already got enough money from Peacock and NBC, Fox, and all the other deals. Yet they have mistreated the fans. Remember when the McMahon family did a semi-shoot, standing in the ring, promising to change the product? I've talked about that. I haven't seen it happen. They messed up with Bobby Lashley and King Corbin out of nowhere. Then the Lashley MVP suddenly go from Cedric Alexander and Shelton Benjamin to ex-Retribution guys. And then he goes on and says some stuff which is probably a little political, you could say. I don't want to bring race into this, but what the heck is going on? Not just because they were all black, but the Hurt Business was actually working. They had a fantastic frontman and MVP, a fantastic wrestler in Benjamin, a great youngster in Cedric. Well, not necessarily a youngster, come on. And the powerhouse Lashley. What were you thinking about bringing in Corbin? When you have something that's working, don't freaking change it. Let's move along now to, that's a respectable name in the wrestling business. Let's move on to somebody who's been very outspoken, but also very controversial at the same time. One of my favorites, Vince Russo. And he does get paid, crowdfunded for the most part, and makes money off of advertising through the Realm Network to be able to go ahead and comment about Raw. Otherwise, I don't think he would talk about this show at all. But there are a lot of people that want to listen to him. I can't listen to him all the time. I did listen to Truth or Consequences, but not now. And I haven't listened to his new stuff, and I don't buy his paid service. Nothing wrong with it. I just don't bother. Also, when I hear that he's made some comments, I can just go and look him up when I need to every once in a while, and I can do my impression. So here's what he said recently. He said that this past Monday night's episode was a copy and paste show. You can't say it better than that. You can't dispute that. He's not wrong. Now, we do know that Braun Strowman and Drew McIntyre had a good main event match. The Monster Men picked up a big win, which is interesting because after Shane McMahon in the cage, Braun Strowman's being pushed. Well, Drew McIntyre is still there, but Braun Strowman now added into a triple threat match now for the WWE Championship at Wrestlemania Backlash. And then the other story that came up into the first hour, Charlotte Flair getting reinstated by Sonya Deville, and Randy Orton teaming up with Riddle and taking out former Hurt Business members Shelton Benjamin and Cedric Alexander. And then the social media came across. And somebody comments about the tomatoes. Now, Vince Russo was on Sportskeeda's Legion of Raw. And in the Raw review, he slammed the state of the product. And here is what Russo says. Get ready for impression. We talked about it last week, bro. This is a copy and paste show. That's all it is. It's copy and paste, copy and paste. You know what I want to talk about? You know who is really screwed here? USA Network. Then he talks about that the company has no incentive to improve their product because they make the same amount of money regardless of the viewers tuning in. And that USA should have given a deal somewhat structured around viewership figures. And here's what he says here. I'm going to tell you this. It's their own fault because you can't give them a contract and they're going to make the same amount of money based on whether they draw 1 million people or 100,000. You can't do that because if they are guaranteed X amount of dollars every single week, they're going to copy and paste to fulfill their obligation with the network. They gotta fill 3 hours every Monday, and that's exactly what they're doing. That's USA Network's fault. whoever negotiated, this should have been on a sliding scale. You hit this number, you make this much. You hit this number, you make that much. There is no incentive for WWE to make this show better, bro. If I was the USA Network, I'd be mad as hell. But I would know that it's my own fault, and unfortunately, there's nothing they could do about it. Might have added a couple of ums and things like that, but that's pretty much the whole point. More from Vince Russo. The tomato segment. I'll tell you something, and this is a shoot. They open up the case, and there's rotten tomatoes. I swear I watched that, and I think about how I could have ever pitched that to a talent. How could I have ever told a talent, yeah, bro, you're going to go out there with a guitar case full of rotten tomatoes? I can't imagine ever pitching that to a talent. They're pros. They are pros. That's how I would look at them. And I would never pitch anything like that to a pro. I'm looking at this, and I can't get past me having to pitch that. Voice of truth. Like him or hate him, Vince Russo is not wrong. And how many times do I have to say that? I don't need to be defending him, but he's telling truth here. But he's telling what everybody else is saying as well. Maybe not as well, but he's basically saying it right. Copy and paste. He goes on to say, I'm telling you, USA Network has to be watching this show, and they've got to be embarrassed, bro. They've got to be embarrassed that this is on their network. I'm sorry. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. More Vince Russo. The current champion is booking on Raw, Bobby Lashley, who he likes. Oh, no, this is Rhea Ripley he talks about. So, as we know, Rhea Ripley was booked on last night's show. Wasn't a lot of logic behind how Ripley acted in ringside during the main event where Charlotte Flair faced Asuka. And Vince Russo opened up about the main event and said, let's back it up to last week, bro. Charlotte came out and beat the crap out of Asuka and Rhea Ripley. Again, logic. I swear to God, if I was like, go back to logic. Okay, so Charlotte came out and beat the crap out of Rhea Ripley and Asuka last week. So this week, Rhea Ripley gets her satisfaction by screwing Charlotte so Asuka goes over. So in other words, she would not want to get any physical retribution on Charlotte. She wants to screw Charlotte. That's what I'm talking about. If you got attacked last week, you're looking for blood this week. You're not looking to screw somebody in a match. That's the problem, bro. It makes Rhea Ripley look weak. You should have wanted to give Charlotte a receipt. You don't care about Asuka. You don't care about the match. That's logic. And that says everything. We can pinpoint and we can nitpick everything. I could. Pretty simple. Now we can move along into some other things where the constant issues from the stars that were part of what was with the company, Erick, Rowan, and Tucker, have recently spoken out. We'll talk about that. First, Erick Rowan. It's been pretty clear on Raw. There are a couple of names that have not been on Raw since WrestleMania. So first there's Bray Wyatt, and second, AJ Styles and Omos. But I guess AJ Styles and Omos will be making their way back. But yeah, we're going to go in the next pay-per-view, and most likely they won't even have a match scheduled against them yet. So they're going to go a pay-per-view without defending the belts. And without Omos, who made such a big impression at WrestleMania, but the spotlight on him has dimmed because they chose not to put him out there. I don't know why. In 3 hours, you can't find time? Couldn't have cut one of those Drew McIntyre spots to do something a little different? Now, maybe if there was a deal where Riddle and Randy Orton are going to go up against AJ Styles and Omos, maybe that's where we're going, but we have no clue. So a couple days ago, Erick Rowan spoke about how he thinks The Fiend can improve if WWE gave creative freedom to Bray Wyatt. Well, that's the point. When Bray Wyatt's done his thing in NXT and the Wyatt family was together, it was pretty damn good. But the booking, of course, and how he was booked to lose so much didn't help. Or when he won the belt, didn't help either. Things have kind of gone down since Super Showdown 2020, when The Fiend took on Goldberg. The character was destroyed, and Bray Wyatt could never raise The Fiend back up to his previous form, and it has not been ever since. So right now, The Fiend is more of a meaningless jobber right now, where none of his storylines have impact on anything. He's just a standalone, an attraction, a novelty. Erick Rowan spoke on Asylum Wrestling Store's virtual signing, and he was asked about this. Quote, in wrestling, it's very hard to be a serial killer because you can't keep dying, you know? Because you got to come back for the sequels. When they're burnt him to a crisp, it was like, okay, what are they going to do next? Because you can't burn him in front of a live audience anymore. No, but I'm a fan of it. Because when I was wearing all the different masks, and I had all the different ones before the Bludgeon Brothers, I know I did Talking Smack where I was a character that had multiple personalities. So I'm glad something like that is getting on TV because it's cool. But it's like, there's no right or wrong way to do it. And up there, you only have so much control of what you can be. When it comes to giving creative freedom to Bray Wyatt, he says, so if you can't get enough creative control, it would work. But it's all up to booking too. If Goldberg can beat him in 2 seconds, but Seth Rollins cannot beat him and throw everything with the kitchen sink at him, it doesn't make for a good watch. He's not wrong. And Bray Wyatt, now Alexa Bliss is basically the Bray Wyatt character, and now she's going to run with it. Because Bray Wyatt is no longer a factor here. Alexa Bliss is basically casted him out after the loss. Like the RKO just, erased him from existence again. With no particular reason why. We saw him shortly after WrestleMania, but then after that, nothing. No word AWOL. Let's move on to Tucker, who was with Heavy Machinery with Otis. And he went ahead and talked. And he was on social media talking about what was going on. Wrote on Twitter, in my opinion, obviously I have a bad taste in my mouth because there is very little opportunity for talent to have any sense of agency over who they are and what happens on TV. To me, it's this part of the creative process that is hurting the product the most currently. Tucker also mentioned that talent are creatively restricted regardless of which brand they're on. Quote, personally, no, I didn't find it to be any different most days. I will say there's a general sense of less stress on the 2-hour show, but creatively I didn't find a difference. Then he took a shot on the Mandy Rose Otis storyline and abruptly ended it, and it was forgotten about. Yeah, or doing a Mandy or Otis story for months with zero payoff. Which he's right. I didn't realize Tucker was there for 8 years. And just like that. We don't even realize sometimes how long some of these stars have been in the company. Maybe going back to FCW days or Performance Center. Who knows? The return on investment is horrible. The conversion rate on the stars that get over and the ones that don't is pathetic. But there's no answer here that is easy to make in order to turn this all around. But that is why on this program on a regular basis, I always talk about the other companies. copy and paste is what WWE is going to do. And they're going to also rehash and retool certain gimmicks that might have worked in the past. But that's all they're going to do. They can live in the late 90s, early 2000s and kind of just recreate something that is somewhat different than it was before, slightly, barely. I mean, the good thing is they're not trying to go ahead and just recreate the same stars over and over. And that's the other thing, is that they have characters. They just can't do like a DC or Marvel comic where they can just find another star to go and play the role. You can't do that. You have to create new roles each time, which is the best part about all of this. Do you want to see somebody else play the role of Undertaker? Could anybody else replace Stone Cold or The Rock? No. But that's a good thing. And so it's been always behooving on WWE to be able to go and create new stars. It's part of the reason we like wrestling so much, because it always does. It's ever changing, it's ever evolving, and that's what happens. But those kind of changes are not happening there. And I'm not one of those wrestling fans that live in the past. I can't do it. It's interesting when I do recaps of AEW or Impact Wrestling or other programming besides WWE, and a lot of people will listen to it. I get a good audience. For the last 2 weeks where I talked about AEW and Impact's Alliance, and especially when I talked leading up to Impact Rebellion, and I did the post-show of Rebellion, well received. I could go ahead and talk about that all I want and praise and glorify what's going on in all these other companies, but I don't do that. I could. There might be an audience in that, but what I noticed for the most part when I used to do my content early on, people still wanted me to talk about WWE, and I did, and I stuck with that. I used to be a little more of a hodgepodge where I talked about the other TV shows, but I don't do that as much unless it's time around the time to go and talk about it. But everybody can have their changes, and I can go and find somebody on TikTok or Twitter or Facebook or wherever that can make their idea of changes. If I had to listen to Wade Keller talk about, let's put these stars off season, not on season. No, not so much that. But I really think if you actually did the Raw format and you actually ran it like a show that had 13-week intervals and you had showrunners, the same creative team, but then that creative showrunner would then go ahead and manage and handle the expectations that had to be done and oversee the process for who had to get over and take the directive of Vince McMahon and say, okay, I want this person over. I don't want this person over. I want this person over. I don't want this person over. And they find a way. And then the consultancy of the wrestling producers, right? The backstage, the agents, you get their input and you bring them in, and then they help to construct the wrestling portion through the storyline. And then they will tell the story. So if it's a Shannon, if it's a Shane Helms or Jason Jordan or, pick them, then they figure out the best way to move along. And when you have people like a Daniel Bryan or an Edge that are in the writer rooms trying to also contribute, then they are consultants. They're not actually writing. Or they could be writing something, but they're not the integral, actually writing out the storylines and all this. We all know, take the scripts away. Step that back. Bullet point, please. We know that works. And everybody praised, even though people were a little bit upset and miffed about that first 30 minutes at WrestleMania Saturday, but we all know that a lot of those promos were actually pretty entertaining and off the cuff, and they were fine. Really wasn't that hard for some of these people to do. So you could do that. I mean, if you have to have a Braun Strowman have the script, then you do that. That's, no choice. But you take that model. The other thing I really think they could do, I don't know how people are going to feel about it, but the network is the network. Okay? 6 pay-per-views. Or make it 8. And then you make it 8, and you split up that time between Royal Rumble and WrestleMania, and you don't put a show in between those two. But you put pay-per-views like you normally do across the rest of the schedule. I like that idea. So for 9 months out of the year, 6 pay-per-views. I think that would be wonderful. They don't have to do the 12. They don't have to do the once a month model anymore. And what they should absolutely do is what some of the other wrestling shows have done and theme out some events based on their old pay-per-views. In Your House, Hell in a Cell. I mean, maybe some of those matches you still keep around, but you could take some other names, Great American Bash, or you could take Great Balls of Fire, whatever you want. You theme out particular episodes of Raw. You already got the 3-hour window, so then go ahead and run it pay-per-view style. Once in a while, get a bumper rating. There's your hot shot booking. You book a good night of wrestling, lead up to that, all on television, and lead up to the main show being on television. And make that a thing where it happens, especially during rating sweeps. So in July or in February or November, that's what you do. It's not a bad idea. And then you find a way to kind of keep things consistent. You could do that too. But what I think will ultimately will help are 2 things. Competition is coming. We don't know what Dynamite's going to be doing for the rating coming up now, but they pulled between 1.2, 1.4 million. They could very well do this again, and their numbers could grow. If they break over 1.5 million, if possible, the ratings go up. Now, next week is indicative. If Blood and Guts pulls a good number, they really built up that next week. Inner Circle versus Pinnacle, they built that up a lot. If Blood and Guts pulls a big number next week, say it pulls over 1.5 million, if that's even possible, if it does, that company's going to take notice. WWE has to take notice and say, okay, AEW, we were removed from that night because really NXT never had a problem with the show. In the whole gamut right now, I'm glad everything is where it is. And also when it comes to NHL now going to be picked up by TBS or TNT, well, I'm hoping it's going to go over to TNT or to TBS, excuse me, and to go ahead and bring it over there and then just take away where TNT doesn't have to worry about Wednesday Night Dynamite. Tony Khan already said he doesn't expect any problems. That Wednesday night's still the dedicated night for Dynamite for the next 2.5 years. And for AEW, the best thing that could be happening to them is their numbers are starting to increase unopposed. Because then I just guarantees them a renewal of their deal coming up in about 1.5 years. Because right before, like the year before the deal ends, 2023, we should expect an extension. And more money coming to them as well. I don't know how it's going to work, but if that happens, and this company then gets to go ahead and gets a renewal in the contract, then they're in. AEW will be permanent, pretty much by that next deal. And what will WWE do next? So there's the competition is going to build up on them. Impact's ratings are getting better. And now we'll see what Thursday nights look like with Kenny Omega celebrating his Impact World Champion, showing the belt as he went out to the ring tonight. And what will it look like on Impact Wrestling coming up Thursday night? Will the numbers go up again because Kenny Omega won the belt? I mean, people are going to be watching after Rebellion. After what happened at Rebellion, people are going to be watching Impact Wrestling Thursday night. I don't think it's going to pull 300,000 viewers, but it's going to pick up something. it'll be momentum that this company needs to learn how to maintain, because they've gotten a couple of shades of brightness. They've gotten a couple of spotlights that their pay-per-views have brought them, and some of the appearances that Kenny Omega or Finn Juice and others have brought on. But Impact Wrestling as a whole needs to find a way to sustain that audience. Whatever they need to do with their current format and their current roster, they need to figure that out. And part of it has to be, if they're not having crowds out there, it doesn't help. And if the show is a little bit formulaic, that's the other problem too. But they'll have to figure that out. Impact Wrestling has an opportunity to still go ahead and rebuild, which they've been doing. And now there's a chance that the audience might actually start picking back up again and start paying attention to them again. That's the number one. Now the number two, remember when I used to do that? I used to train number one and I would never get to number two. Number two will be, I think the problem will be handled internally, because I think Nick Khan, the powers that be, within the major construct of the corporation part of the company, they're going to have to intervene on the problems going on down on the ground. They're going to have to get out of the top of Titan Tower. They're going to have to go down to Tampa, and they're going to have to investigate what's going on here. They're going to have to actually internally handle it. Because then the broadcasters might come in and say, hey, Nick, you brought this in for us, but we need something more return on investment. Like, this company, hey, we know what they're doing, but they could be doing so much better. Can you go and take a look at this for us? And he will. No choice. So we know that Mark Carrano last week got fired. And that was because of the issues with Mickie James and the trash bag in a box, which had all her gear sent to her. And how that actually, we learned that was actually a common thing for some stars that were let go. Rick Canellis could attest to it. Well, there are some changes happening right now in the creative end and from the producer end. Let's talk about that. So Ringside News learned, and this is a while back, but this is back on March 30th, that Chris Dunn left the company, and he worked closely with the Street Profits and their unique promos, and he was with the company August of 2016, and then he got let go. So there was that. And then most recently, this is happening today as we record, Jason Jordan has become the lead producer at WWE. So he now is a lead producer at WWE TV tapings, assuming the role vacated by longtime employee John Laurinaitis, who reclaimed his old role as head of talent relations recently, and this is after Mark Carrano being let go. The WWE producer acts as the middleman between creative and the superstars. Therefore, Jordan has picked up a crucial role in the production of the TV programming. A big promotion for Jordan, who is 32 years old and one of the more senior members of the backstage team. And John Cohn, who was known as a referee for a long time in the company, promoted to a new backstage role. He's now second in command to Laurinaitis in talent relations. PW Insider also now reported that Adam Pearce has received the promotion, but his new role is currently unknown. There's all of that. So that's interesting that's all being done. But as I close out this episode, I'll just say this, that it's unfortunate that this company is going through what it's going through right now. And it's been allowed for so long to make mistakes. And we overall don't want that to keep happening. We want the company to be better. And those two factors I just mentioned right there will ultimately, I don't know how long it's going to take, but competition and internal affairs, if you will, are going to ultimately right the ship. I honestly believe that's going to happen. So mark my words on this episode 610, that's what I said. Because if AEW does get their ratings back up and some of the other wrestling companies start doing well and a couple of things start picking up, that's going to be an issue. Because if this company's not paying attention to the fact that the other wrestling companies are going to do better regardless of what's going on, it's also a testament to the company as a whole. How is WWE able to do so well in so many different things, but then the thing that they're best known for, they're failing right now? And I can appreciate the casual fans wanting to defend and continuously still build up what's going on while complaining. And then, God forbid, anybody else complains about it and makes a comment. That's why I keep my comments on Twitter to a minimum when it comes to wrestling, because I get bashed on it. Because it's a very sensitive environment over there. And that's okay. Same thing with Twitter, or same thing with Facebook and other places. That's fine. But I know for me, I'm still going to go ahead and keep myself knowing that there's going to be a change. Listen, ultimately, what I've been waiting for in this program since 2012 will come to fruition. I came on to do this program because of the fact that I was needing to find a place to be critical. And by that point, it started getting to the point we needed to be doing about that. The other thing that's going to be also an underlying factor is eventually those live crowds, we're not going to get just the WrestleMania crowd. Well, I don't know what the company's going to do. If they're going to want to live shows again, once they get back to are they going to go back to the house circuit like they did before? Or are they going to limit it? Because Hugo Savinovich said the right thing. The company's making a lot of money doing the shows like they're doing in a studio environment. It's working just fine. I'm going to just say it like this. What if they did do something where they were able to go and stay doing the Thunderdome and they did residencies like they did? And they could just keep a certain amount of fans out there and just do the house shows. And then you absolutely make the house shows something that people want to go to. So if you kept the TV shows, imagine if you didn't make them where the live crowd could be around it. Now, the fans won't like it, but the company could do that in a cost-cutting measure. And then you entice the fans to go watch their favorite wrestlers on the house shows, just the way it used to be. It's not a bad idea. It could also be done in the same vein. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. We'll come back next week. We'll see what else they're going to be building up when it comes to WrestleMania Backlash. Let's just make a point of what they've already planned for WrestleMania Backlash at this point so far. What we know is going to happen May 16th. And well, nobody's talking about this, but of course, Blood and Guts is next week. Look forward to that. Let's talk about what's going to be planned for Blood and Guts next week anyway. Let's just do that real quick. Cody Rhodes return tonight. So some of the matches they already have scheduled for next Wednesday is Blood and Guts match, Inner Circle versus the Pinnacle, a number one contender match for the World Tag Team titles, SU versus the Acclaim versus Jurassic Express versus Varsity Blondes. John Moxley and Eddie Kingston will take on Michael Nakazawa and Kenny Omega, and Britt Baker will be in action. So we'll have that all coming up next week. Oh, and Cody Rhodes versus QT Marshall with the Factory next week as well. Forgot about that. So, pretty packed night next week. And then as for WrestleMania Backlash, that comes up May 16th. 2 matches scheduled. Bayley will go up against Bianca Belair for the SmackDown Women's title. And the WWE Championship will be contested in a triple threat. Bobby Lashley coming by MVP versus Drew McIntyre and Braun Strowman. Keep an eye on that for coming up here in May. And then Double or Nothing is May 30th. Memorial Day just around the corner. We're 4 weeks away from Double or Nothing. So that's going to come up next. And nothing's been playing out for that yet, but we'll get something built up for sure once we get once we get past Blood and Guts. We'll definitely see what they're going to be doing. So until next week, come back for another Wrestling Is Real podcast, because wrestling needs us.
Thank you for listening to the Wrestling Is Real podcast. You can find all previous episodes at WrestlingIsReal.com or subscribe to the show on all major podcast outlets, including Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. Follow the King of Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at King of Podcasts, and search King of Podcasts on YouTube, or type youtube.com/JBRASCO951. This has been a presentation of the King of Podcasts Radio Network.